When did you realize the person everyone warned you about was actually trying to protect you? I was 12 when Marcus moved in next door. The whole neighborhood buzzed with whispers within hours. That's the man from the news, Mrs. Henderson said, clutching her pearls like they could protect her from whatever evil she imagined. The one who went to prison. Mom grabbed my arm that first evening as I headed outside to ride my bike. Her fingers dug into my skin hard enough to leave marks that would still be there the next morning. Stay away from that house, she said, her voice sharp with a fear I'd never heard before. That man is dangerous. He hurt children. I wanted to ask how she knew, what exactly he'd done, why someone dangerous would be allowed to live in our neighborhood. But the look in her eyes stopped me cold. This wasn't up for discussion. For weeks, I watched him through my bedroom window. He kept to himself, tending a small garden that was actually quite beautiful. Tomatoes and sunflowers mostly, arranged in neat rows with little handwritten labels stuck into the soil. He never made eye contact with anyone, never waved back when kids rode past. When children appeared on bikes, parents would immediately call them back inside, their voices sharp with panic. The mailman wouldn't even walk up his driveway. He'd throw packages from the sidewalk and hurry away like the house itself was contaminated. Mrs. Patterson from across the street started a phone tree, calling every parent whenever Marcus left his house. He's headed toward the school, she'd whisper into the receiver. Better keep the kids inside today. The Homeowners Association held an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. I wasn't supposed to know about it, but I heard Mom on the phone with Mrs. Chen, their voices low and worried. We've contacted a lawyer, Mom said. There has to be something we can do, some way to get him out of here. But apparently there wasn't. Marcus had served his time, whatever that time had been for. He had every legal right to live wherever he wanted, even if that somewhere was right next door to families with children. But I noticed things others didn't. Little things that made me question everything the adults were saying, like how he'd leave his porch light on until exactly 4:15 p.m. every weekday, which was precisely when I got home from school, even though he worked nights at the warehouse. I'd see him watching from his kitchen window as I walked up our driveway, and only then would the light click off. How he'd suddenly appear to water his plants whenever the Parker boys followed me down our street, and they'd mysteriously decide to take a different route home. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but it happened too many times to be random. How his curtains would twitch whenever I walked past, like he was keeping watch. Not in a creepy way, more like a guard dog checking for threats. I started paying attention to his routine. Every morning at 7:30 a.m., he'd leave for his night shift at Morrison's warehouse, dressed in a simple blue uniform with his name embroidered on the pocket. He drove a beat-up Honda Civic that looked like it had seen better decades. He'd return at 6 a.m., park in his driveway, and go straight inside without looking around. On weekends, he'd work in his garden, but the moment children appeared outside, he'd pack up his tools and disappear. If a kid's ball rolled into his yard, he'd throw it back over the fence without coming outside. When Girl Scouts came selling cookies, he'd leave money in an envelope taped to his door with a note saying to keep the change. It was like he was trying to be invisible. Mrs. Henderson organized what she called safety patrols, parents taking turns walking the neighborhood, keeping an eye on Marcus's house. They'd write down when he left, when he returned, who visited him, no one ever did, what packages he received. We need to document everything, she announced at the next homeowners meeting, in case something happens. But what struck me was how hard Marcus worked to avoid giving them anything to document. He never lingered outside, never spoke to neighbors unless directly addressed, and even then his responses were brief and polite. Never played music loud enough to hear. Never had parties or visitors. If he was a predator, he was the most antisocial predator I'd ever heard of. One evening in October, I was walking home late from the library when 3 older boys cornered me behind the gas station. Jake Morrison and his friends, the same ones who'd been making my life hell since middle school started. Look what we got here, Jake sneered, shoving me against the brick wall hard enough to scrape my shoulders. Little bookworms all alone. Jake was the kind of kid who'd been held back twice and was already shaving in 7th grade. His friends, Tyler and Brett, were smaller but mean in that pack animal way that made them dangerous. They went through my backpack, laughing as my books scattered across the dirty pavement. One of them grabbed my math homework, the assignment I'd spent 3 hours perfecting, and tore it in half. Another kicked my water bottle, sending it rolling into the gutter, where it landed in a puddle of something that smelled like rotting food. Please, I said, hating how my voice cracked. Just leave me alone. Ah, little baby's gonna cry, Jake taunted, shoving me harder against the wall. The rough brick caught my jacket and tore a hole near the shoulder. Maybe we should teach you some manners. Show you what happens to freaks who think they're better than everyone else. Tyler pulled out his phone and started recording. This is gonna be great, he laughed. We can put it online. Show everyone what a loser you are. I closed my eyes, wishing I could disappear. Mom was going to kill me for coming home late. The librarian had warned us about walking alone after dark. I should have called for a ride. Should have asked someone to walk with me. Should have done anything except put myself in this situation. That's when Marcus appeared. He didn't run or shout or announce himself dramatically. He just stepped out from behind the dumpster where he must have been taking out trash from the Chinese restaurant and asked quietly, "Problem here?" His voice was calm, almost conversational, but something about it made the hair on my arms stand up. He wasn't a big man, maybe average height, lean build, the kind of person you wouldn't notice in a crowd. But the way he stood, the way he looked at the boys without blinking, suggested someone you really didn't want to mess with. The boys looked up, and I watched recognition flash across their faces. Jake's cocky grin disappeared instantly. His friends took a step back, suddenly looking very young and very scared. "No problem, mister," Jake stammered, his voice completely different from the confident bully tone he'd been using seconds earlier. "We were just leaving," Marcus said, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that made even me nervous. "Yeah," Tyler agreed quickly, stuffing his phone back in his pocket. "We were just leaving." Within seconds, all three of them were gone, leaving my things scattered everywhere and me standing there shaking. Marcus knelt down and helped me collect my books. Up close, I could see the deep sadness in his eyes, lines around them that spoke of sleepless nights and old pain. His hands were gentle as he straightened the pages of my torn notebook, careful not to make the damage worse. "You okay?" he asked, handing me my backpack. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "They hurt you?" I shook my head. The brick wall had scraped my shoulders, but that was nothing compared to what might have happened if he hadn't shown up. "Good." He stood up, brushing dirt off his knees. "You should get home. It's getting dark." "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded but didn't smile, just turned and walked back toward the dumpster, shoulders hunched like he was carrying the weight of the world. I made it home just as Mom was starting dinner. She took one look at my torn jacket and the scrapes on my hands and immediately launched into protective parent mode. "What happened? Are you hurt? Where have you been?" I told her about staying late at the library, about the boys cornering me, about someone scaring them away. I didn't mention who that someone was. "This is exactly why I don't want you walking alone after dark," she said, dabbing antiseptic on my scraped palms. "There are dangerous people out there." The irony wasn't lost on me. The dangerous person everyone warned me about had just saved me from actual danger. The next day, Mom was waiting when I got back from school. Her face was white with fury, and I knew immediately that someone had seen me with Marcus. "Mrs. Chen saw you talking to him," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "I specifically told you to stay away from that monster." "But Mom, he just helped me. Don't you dare defend him," she snapped, and I was shocked by the venom in her voice. Mom rarely raised her voice. "Never use that tone with me. Do you have any idea what kind of man he is? What he did to children before he went to prison?" I tried to explain about the bullies, about how Marcus had just been taking out trash and happened to be there, about how he'd never even really talked to me. But Mom wasn't listening. She was already grabbing her keys. "We're going to see Pastor Williams," she announced. "Right now." The drive to the church was silent and tense. Mom's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and she kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror like I might disappear. Pastor Williams met us in his office, which was decorated with crosses of every size and material, family photos showing 3 generations of smiling people, and motivational posters with Bible verses in flowing script. He was a kind man in his 60s, who'd baptized me as a baby and had always treated me like one of his own grandchildren. But today his expression was serious as he sat me down and spoke in careful, measured words about dangerous people and how they operated. "Predators are smart, Emma," he said, leaning forward with his hands clasped on his desk. "They don't look like the monsters in movies. They look like friendly neighbors, helpful teachers, respected community members. They pretend to be kind to gain children's trust." He pulled out a pamphlet from his desk drawer, one of those educational materials with pictures of smiling adults talking to children, designed to teach kids about stranger danger. "They study kids' routines," he continued, pointing to illustrations that suddenly seemed more sinister than educational. "They learn their vulnerabilities, find ways to seem helpful. They position themselves as rescuers so children will trust them." "But he didn't offer me anything," I protested. "He just scared away some bullies and told me to go home." Pastor Williams nodded gravely, like this was exactly what he'd expected me to say. "That's precisely what I'm talking about. He positioned himself as your rescuer so you'd feel grateful to him. Trust him. Next time, he might offer to walk you home for safety, then maybe invite you inside for a snack or to use the bathroom." He opened the pamphlet to a page showing the progression of predatory behavior. The slow escalation from helpful stranger to dangerous situation. "That's how these men operate, sweetheart. They're patient. They build relationships slowly. They make children feel special, chosen, protected." Mom squeezed my shoulder, her grip tight enough to hurt. "This is why you need to report any contact immediately, before you become his next victim." I nodded and promised to stay away, but something didn't add up in my 12-year-old brain. If Marcus was hunting for victims, why did he avoid children completely? I'd been watching him for weeks, and I'd never seen him try to talk to any kid in the neighborhood. When the elementary school bus stopped at our corner every morning, he'd retreat inside his house until it left. When parents walked by with strollers, he'd turn away or find something to do in his backyard. If children's toys ended up in his yard, he'd throw them back over the fence without coming outside. For someone supposedly targeting kids, he sure went to a lot of trouble to avoid them. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with watching Marcus. Not because I wanted to talk to him. Mom had made her position on that crystal clear, but because I was trying to understand the disconnect between what adults were telling me and what I was seeing with my own eyes. I started keeping a notebook, documenting everything I observed. My scientific approach to the situation would have made my science teacher proud if I'd been studying anything other than our neighbor's daily routine. Every morning at 7:30 a.m. sharp, he'd leave for his night shift at Morrison's warehouse, dressed in that same blue uniform with Marcus embroidered on the pocket. The warehouse was on the other side of town, past the industrial district where most kids never went. He'd return at 6 a.m. looking tired, park his beat-up Honda in the driveway, and go straight inside without looking around or lingering. On weekends, he'd work in his garden, and this was where his behavior got really interesting. He'd positioned his small vegetable plot so he had a clear view of the bus stop where elementary kids waited each morning, but also so he could retreat quickly if any of them approached. I watched him plant tomatoes, sunflowers, green beans, and herbs in neat rows with little handwritten labels. His garden was beautiful, clearly the work of someone who cared about growing things properly. But the moment children appeared outside, he'd pack up his tools and disappear inside. It was starting to feel less like stalking behavior and more like protection. One Saturday morning, I decided to test my theory. Instead of staying inside like Mom preferred, I sat on our front porch with a book, clearly visible from Marcus's yard. Sure enough, within minutes of settling into the porch swing, I saw his curtains twitch. But he didn't come outside, didn't try to talk to me, didn't even wave. Instead, he stayed at his window, and I realized he was watching the street. When a white van I didn't recognize drove slowly past our house, Marcus moved to a different window to keep it in sight. When it turned around and came back, he stepped onto his porch. The van kept driving, but Marcus stayed outside for another 10 minutes, watching. When I told Mom about the van, she was immediately concerned. What kind of van? Did you see who was driving? But when I mentioned that Marcus had been watching it too, her expression changed. He was probably the one driving it earlier, she said dismissively. Predators often case neighborhoods, looking for opportunities. That didn't make sense to me. If Marcus was casing our neighborhood, why would he then stand on his porch to scare himself away? I started paying more attention to the details Mom and other adults seemed to miss or dismiss. Like how Marcus had installed motion sensor lights around his property, not just for his own protection, but positioned to illuminate the street in front of our house and the Chen's house next door. How he'd started parking his car in his driveway instead of his garage, creating a clearer line of sight to the street. How he'd trimmed the hedge between our properties so it wouldn't block his view of our front door. If I didn't know better, I'd think he was setting up a security system to protect the neighborhood. One afternoon, I decided to test my theory more directly. Instead of walking straight home from school, I took a detour through Riverside Park where older kids sometimes hung out smoking cigarettes and causing trouble. It was risky. Mom had specifically forbidden me from going there alone, but I needed to know if my suspicions were correct. Sure enough, Jake Morrison and his crew were there, sprawled on the picnic tables near the basketball court. They spotted me immediately. Well, Jake called out, flicking his cigarette toward me, if it isn't our little friend. I tried to keep walking, but they surrounded me, blocking the path back to the street. My heart was pounding, but I kept my expression neutral. If my theory was right, if Marcus was really watching over our neighborhood, "You look scared," Brett observed, grinning in that mean way that made my skin crawl. "Maybe we should walk you home. Make sure you're safe." They started closing in, and I genuinely began to panic. What if I was wrong? What if Marcus really was a predator, and I just put myself in danger to prove some stupid point? What if he wasn't even watching? Wasn't even aware I was here? Yeah, Tyler agreed, pulling out his phone again. "We should definitely make sure you get home safe. Wouldn't want anything bad to happen to you." The way he said it made it clear that bad things were exactly what he had in mind. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. "There's my neighbor," Marcus said casually, like we were old friends who'd planned to meet at the park. "Ready to head home, Emma?" Jake and his friends immediately backed off. They didn't run this time, but they moved away from me, suddenly very interested in their cigarettes and phones. Yeah, I managed, my voice only shaking a little. "Ready." Marcus walked beside me in comfortable silence until we reached the edge of the park. Then he stopped. "That was reckless," he said quietly without looking at me. "You put yourself in danger to see if I'd show up." I stared at him in shock. "How did you—" "I know what it looks like when someone's testing boundaries," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "I've seen it before. Don't do it again. Those boys are more dangerous than you realize." "How did you know I was there?" "I didn't. I was walking to the store and heard voices. Recognized yours." He started to walk away, then turned back. "And Emma? Next time you want to know something about me, just ask. Don't put yourself at risk for answers." That night, I lay in bed thinking about his words. How had he known I was testing him? And why did he seem more concerned about my safety than angry about being watched? I decided to take his advice. The next Saturday, I found him in his garden and approached the fence between our yards. He looked up from weeding his tomato plants, surprised but not unwelcoming. "You said I could ask," I said, gripping the chain-link fence between us. He set down his small shovel and gave me his full attention. Up close, I could see that his eyes weren't just sad. They were haunted, like someone who'd seen things he wished he could forget. "Why does everyone think you hurt children?" His face went very still. For a long moment, he didn't answer. I could hear birds chirping, a dog barking somewhere down the street, the distant sound of someone mowing their lawn. Then he sighed deeply, like he was releasing a breath he'd been holding for years. "Because I did hurt someone," he said finally, "just not the way people think." Before I could ask what he meant, Mom's voice cut across the yard like a whip. "Emma Marie Johnson, get away from that fence right now." She was standing on our porch, phone in hand, looking ready to call 911. I started. "Inside. Now." The tone of her voice told me this wasn't up for discussion. That evening, Mom sat me down for the most serious conversation of my life. She'd called Pastor Williams, who'd called someone at the police station, who'd reminded her of Marcus's parole restrictions. Apparently, talking to minors was a violation that could send him back to prison. Do you understand what you've done? Mom asked, her voice thick with worry and anger. You could have sent him back to prison. And worse, you could have put yourself in terrible danger. But he didn't do anything wrong, I protested. He just answered my question. That's not the point, Mom said, running her hands through her hair in frustration. The point is that you deliberately disobeyed me. You put yourself at risk. You interfered with a convicted criminal's parole. I wanted to tell her about the bullies, about how Marcus had never made me feel unsafe, about all the little things that suggested he was protecting rather than hunting. But I could see the fear in her eyes was real, and arguing would only make things worse. Promise me, she said, gripping my shoulders. Promise me you'll stay away from him. No more watching, no more questions, no more contact of any kind. I promised, but I couldn't stop thinking about what Marcus had said. He'd hurt someone, but not the way people thought. What did that mean? Late that Thursday night, I heard shouting from Marcus's yard. I peeked through my curtains and saw 3 men surrounding him on his front lawn. They were all bigger than Marcus, dressed in dark clothes, their faces twisted with anger.